Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's ISE² security briefing. My name is Lindsay Drabwell, Head of Membership Services here at ISE² EMEA, and I'm delighted to be your webinar moderator for the upcoming session. Today's topic is brought to us by CrowdStrike. It's their first time on our webinar channel and we're delighted to welcome them. The theme for the webinar is Cybercrime, Cults and Confraternities, the evolution of Nigerian 419 email scams. And joining me to give the presentation is Zeki Chiredi. I'll be handing over the reins to him shortly, but before we start, and as is now traditional, let me just welcome you, the audience. We have nearly 700 of you pre-registered for this webinar session, and it looks as though around 300 are currently listening live, and that number will rise. A little bit about who ISE² are for those of you for whom this may be your first time on the channel. ISE² is the world's largest professional organisation for information security, represented in all industries across all geographies. The slide there in front of you shows our vision and our mission, and it's the breadth of the membership that allows us to aspire to achieve them. For any of you who are with us today, who are members, you represent part of our 130,000 global membership, of which just over 23,000 are based in EMEA. If you're not a member and would like more information, please state so in the feedback and one of our colleagues will contact you. You'll see on the next slide that part of our mission is to provide networking opportunities and importantly to educate the industry. Not only to educate our members, but to also educate the wider InfoSec community. Some of the initiatives we have aimed at achieving that are our member-driven initiatives, also our Secure Summits, we'll talk a little bit about those in a second, our chapter events and member receptions, and our tools and resources. As mentioned, our Secure Summit. Our Secure Summit this year will be taking place in London in September the 19th to the 20th. As a member, you can earn 16 CPEs for the event, and it is free to members. The registration link is there in front of you, so if you are interested in attending, please do register at your earliest convenience. And please do also save the date for our next summit, which will be taking place in The Hague in the Netherlands from the 14th to the 16th of April. Here you can see a little collection of our webinar briefings. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with our channel by now. We do have over 100 hours of archived webinars, which include these security briefings, our member welcome webinars, and our CISO Says. Please do stay connected with us. We have recently updated our contact preferences. So if you're not opted in, then you may be missing out on some really exciting news from ISE² about what we're getting up to and how to get the most out of your membership. So when you have a few minutes, just make sure you log in and update your contact preferences. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please type your questions as they come to you during today's presentation. We'll have the opportunity at the end for our lively Q&A session. If you struggle with any connectivity during the presentation, it will most likely be on your side rather than ours, so you may need to just log out and log back in again. We will answer the questions, as I said, at the end of the presentation. Please do rate your experience. The feedback that we get from you is invaluable to helping us develop the webinar channel. Stay with us for at least 45 minutes and you'll be credited with 1 CPE in approximately 5 to 7 business days. And the PDF version of the presentation will be available from the Attachments tab after the live session has finished. So without further ado, I'm delighted to pass over to Zeki, who will take the reins from here.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you everyone for joining today's session. So my name is Zeki Chiredi. I work for CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is a security organization, and we do a number of things, from endpoint protection, threat intelligence, to incident response services. Today's session is all about something that we have been seeing a huge uptick in, and that's business email compromise. In the last 12 months, we've been regularly contacted by individuals and organizations that have been targeted by adversaries and criminal organizations and causing business email compromise attacks against their networks. So today's session is about not only understanding, what is business email compromise, but also being able to, see and understand how can you protect your organization against these types of attacks, no matter what size or business or individual your company may be. In 2016, there were over 12,000 individual complaints given towards the IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is monitored and managed by the FBI in the US. With those 12,000 complaints, there was over 360 million US dollars worth of money being taken away by these criminal organizations by those individual complaints. Now, if we look at the 2016 information, it's pretty clear to see that this is actually quite a widespread epidemic that is targeting, a broad array of individuals and organizations. Now, this is companies that are, small independent businesses to large billion-dollar organizations themselves being targeted for, a vast amount of money. It's also clear, looking at these results, that this epidemic has much reward for those criminal actors targeting those businesses, which simply looks to be a threat that's not going to go anytime soon due to the reward and monetization. So let's kind of take a little look further and understand what exactly business email compromise is. Business email compromise is actually pertinent to the field of e-crime. It's actually looked at by the FBI as being one of the largest e-crime vectors used. So today we talk a lot about ransomware and those types of cyber threats that target organizations every single day. But based on the actual amount of monetization and reward these criminal organizations get away with, e-crime, from an e-crime perspective, business email compromise is a lot bigger criminal vector. It usually relies on social engineering techniques. So individual criminals targeting your business, understanding and gaining knowledge of individuals within your organization, as well as your organization as a whole. In some cases, they may use malware or malware techniques. But again, predominantly, they're just utilizing social engineering tactics. And lastly, it composes over a number of scenarios. Now, these scenarios are defined in 5 key areas. And again, it's quite important for us to understand these scenarios, because by understanding this information, it allows us to take this data back and relate it back to our business. By understanding these scenarios, we're able to educate individuals within our organizations to be able to be on high risk if any of these occur. But it's also good to understand these scenarios because, again, if this happens a lot of time in your business legitimately, do you need to put extra steps and processes to make sure that a legitimate process is easily identified against an illegitimate process? So an example of these scenarios, it could be anything from businesses working with a foreign supplier. So as an example, your foreign supplier contacting you and changing their bank account details. A business executive receiving or initiating a request for a large wire transfer. Is this something that happens on a regular basis in your organization, or do we need to put processes in place to be able to easily identify these malicious steps? Business contacts receiving fraudulent correspondence through compromised emails, business executive and attorney impersonation, and lastly, data theft. So again, very importantly, looking into the operational kill chain, this has a lot of similarities to the typical traditional cyber kill chain processes we've all grown to understand. These threat actors simply target, from the initial stage, from the target identification, we'll start doing research on their target groups and organizations they would like to initiate as a victim. Once they have actually started identifying the organization and key leadership and individuals, such as individuals in finance or accounts departments, they'll start actually targeting them through spear phishing campaigns. These spear phishing campaigns can contain anything from a link within the email that will divert to a malicious web page, or in some cases utilize documents to run exploits and run droppers for further malware, such as remote access tools or keyloggers. Very, very similar to kind of a cyber threat kill chain, we also then start seeing lateral movement. In this case, rather than seeing lateral movement within your network, we're actually seeing the actual threat actor with criminal organizations start doing lateral movement within your email system. So once they've been able to get a foothold, they want to start identifying and gaining access to other email accounts, or start understanding who they can start targeting for the next stage, which would be kind of the target interaction. Target interaction will be focusing on their victim who has access to transfer those illicit funds or has access to wire transfers in your business. They'll start building a relationship with that user so they can trust you and be able to actually make sure they can send that money out. Now, the number of social engineering tactics contained here is several ways. It could be anything from emailing someone that you have regular cadence with or regular communication. In some cases, they'll literally open an email that has already been created and click reply. So for the victim, they believe they're just carrying on a communication they had with the email sender from a while back, making it even more realistic for them to believe and trust that the commands and the request for funds is even more legitimate. And of course, lastly, monetization. Once those funds are transferred, typically to a bank account in China or Hong Kong, the threat actor has access to that information and that money, and it starts being transferred to a number of other bank accounts, so you cannot gain access. Now, to kind of fully understand the threat actors behind it, one easy technique is to follow the money. Now, we all know in typical circumstances, your bank can do a very, very good job of gaining access to that money if you quickly realize that you sent it to a malicious place. Typically, the bank has the ability to pull back those funds that you've sent from the account that you sent it to. The criminal organizations realize this, and they keep a very, very close eye on those bank accounts, making sure that any money that gets sent to it initially is automatically and quickly transferred to a bank account internationally. Typically, the process that we see is once a business email compromise fraud has actually been done, the actual criminal organizations will very, very quickly transfer to accounts throughout the international banking world, meaning it's actually near to impossible for an organization, even ever how quick they realize the mistake, to actually get their money back unless they have some type of insurance within the organization. The way these criminal organizations work is they'll typically utilize bank accounts in China or Hong Kong. It's well known for open source intelligence sourcing that these criminal organizations send people to China and to Hong Kong to create and open legitimate accounts, which are then used for the initial staging process of getting the funds out of their victims. Once the initial money has been transferred to those international banks, money mules are then used to actually take the cash out and transfer it back to the actual criminal organizations themselves. Interestingly, romance scams, a scam that we've all known about for many years, plays a very, very key role in business email compromise. It's typically classed and considered a secondary scheme associated with business email compromise, but it's a key role to allow those criminal organizations to gain their monetary funds. Typically, we're seeing over 70 different countries, banks being used to actually send those illicit funds, meaning the needs of a vast amount of money mules to actually go and gain that data, so that money, and sent back to the criminal organization as needed. And the romance scam played a perfect capability into this. Typically these victims are widows, divorced, and become very, very emotionally attached to the criminal who is working them. They are then used to utilize their own accounts or create new accounts for the criminal, and then able to send the money to them, which they then take out and transfer to the actual criminal organization. Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa, and it is a long-standing source of e-crime attacks on targets in generally wealthier countries. While popular culture, Nigerian print scams are often dismissed for their stylistic crudeness, the reality is Nigerian criminals have been able to steal significant amounts of funds through fraud vectors such as business email compromise. We're all very, very familiar with the 419 scam, but again, the 419 scam sets up a perfect stepping stone for what is today business email compromise. Typically, young Nigerians, previously often called Yahoo boys, start learning their criminal traits and capabilities through scamming careers in university. Today, there's to believe to be over 5 million individual scammers located in the Lagos region alone. Typically, they'll start off with very, very simplified scams, targeting organizations or individuals via SMS messages or other official-looking documents. And once they've gained the confidence of their victim, they will then simply request money through wire transfers or Western Union transfers. And again, these are what's very, very known as the 419 scams. Now, as e-crime has evolved over the past decade and become a global issue, individuals realize that this is a great money-making techniques, and Nigerian cybercriminals have evolved to work with that. And as mentioned previously, malware does play a key role. Now, unlike other criminal organizations with a large cybercrime backing, Nigeria does not have a malware development scene. These cybercriminals opt for more open source capabilities or leverage free and commodity tool sets that are widely available. Now, they typically choose one of two types of tools: a keylogger or a remote access tool. The reason for this is these tools are perfectly chosen to provide reconnaissance information. For example, remote access tools have the ability to steal credentials and email addresses, which are a vital component to the criminal actor. Keyloggers, again, a very, very simple tool set that allows them to actually capture every single thing the user is writing and send it back to their command and control infrastructure. Again, these are relatively immature tools and technologies, which means they're very, very easy to adapt and understand and educate and learn about, making it a great tool set for the criminal organizations to use. The majority of organizations today focus on more of the highly sophisticated malware out there, and it's a great example that very, very simple tool sets can still be highly effective in the wrong hands. Now, very interestingly is the actual evolution and where these cybercriminals come from. In Nigeria, there has been what's called confraternities since as early as 1952. These originally have come from what's called the pirates. Pirates was a very, very a small group of individuals, and originally was designed as a safe haven for gifted university graduates, as well as undergraduates as well. Eventually, there seemed to be a splinter group set off from the original pirates, and over a certain time led to these groups becoming separate gangs, and soon enough, social violence occurred. Now, although the original aims of the pirates group and the confraternities originally was to create that safe haven and keep away from any selfish acts, these groups ended up taking on more of an altruistic approach and focus on extreme violence, cultism, and also rampant organized crime. One of the organizations that we can actually put back to the use of business email compromise is the Black Hats group. These are believed to be part of the neo-black movement, an organized organization in Nigeria. They've since, do work on a number of organized crime ranging from human trafficking, narcotics, but most recently in the actual cybercrime and business email compromise. The Black Hats group has the ability to work within a number of international organizations as well as focusing on in Nigeria as well. They have a number of what's called pyramid or zones available throughout the world, including Canada and the UK. And within those different zones, they have fully fledged teams allowing them to fully operate and compromise individuals. Now, typically, a team is composed of what's called a spammer, a catcher, and a freelancer. Spammers typically acquire email lists and operate advanced mail systems. The catchers will monitor the response to spam campaigns and make first contact with the victims. And lastly, the freelancer will perform additional duties such as assisting with romance scams, acquiring, developing infrastructure, and also creating any fake documentation that is used as part of the social engineering techniques and to try and build those relationships with the victims. Lastly, these organizations are able to communicate in a very, very safe but open source, mostly utilizing closed Facebook groups and using their own language to be able to obfuscate their communication, but also make sure they can openly communicate to the rest of the organization as freely as possible. So next what we want to do is take a little look into some of the observed campaigns we've been working on and have seen in the last 12 months. But typically in the last 12 months, we've seen two core business email compromise scams, focusing on wire fraud and also spam campaigns. Now, interestingly enough, wire fraud typically is caught within the first or second attempt. We see most of the focus being on organizations utilizing Office 365 or Google Suite and do not have any two-factor authentication being used. Now, typically, once the organization is compromised, the first things the actual criminal organization will do is start utilizing that platform to create new rule sets, to search for certain keywords, but also use this as a way to monitor the email traffic and make sure no one is aware that they're actually working and operating within the email system. In general, majority of attacks come from Nigerian IP addresses. So typically the original email spam or targeted email will come from a Nigerian IP address. But again, we are starting to see small groups and individuals working with these cybercrime organizations using more modern services like proxies to try and obfuscate and hide themselves and hide their IP addresses. Now, typically, an observed campaign follows a number of core steps. We've discussed about the kind of kill chain previously, but kind of looking into some of the campaigns that we've seen recently, start off with a spear phishing email. From there, the actual victim will be transferred to a fake login form. The actual email address of the actual user will be pre-populated to make it look even more confidential and legitimate, and forcing the user to put in their email password into the web form. Typically, these web pages aren't exact spoofs or copies of your own login forms, but just simple username and password entry forms. These are connected to very, very basic PHP send mail forms, which will, the second you actually enter the details, will send an email to the actual criminal organization with your credentials. From there, the victim is typically redirected to a legitimate web page. We see a number of different sources being used, such as fake DocuSign pages, as well as the usual email providers such as Gmail and Office 365. Once those credentials have been stolen, they'll access the compromised accounts. From there, they'll start trying to gain access to further mailboxes. This could be replicating the exact same process, but instead of using an external email address, we'll use the internal email box they now have access to, making it look more legitimate when they start sending emails out to other individuals within the organization. And this process will be carried on until they get the right target and the right resources they need to be able to start their final processes. As mentioned before, rule sets will be created as well as manual queries will be run to look for certain keywords. Anything from transfer, invoice, payment, CEO or bank. And this allows the actual organization, the criminal organization, to start understanding the communication that's going on and again helping identify the right resources for the actual last stage, which would be to attempt to transfer money out of the organization. Once they've been able to create that relationship and compromise the correct account, they typically request a transfer up to $1 million US. And again, once that's been successful, that money will be taken to an account controlled by the cybercriminal organization and then transferred to the subsidiary accounts very, very quickly to make sure there's no way the reversal of the actual transfer is possible by your bank. Now, overall, that seems quite a simple process, but again, it's very, very highly effective for those criminal organizations. And similarly, we've actually started to see more sophisticated techniques also being used by these individuals working on behalf of those criminal organizations. So, for example, one thing we're seeing here is the targeting and compromise of the supply chain. So maybe not directly targeting your business, but targeting individuals and entities that may be part of the overall organization. So, for example, maybe your third-party accountancy firm being compromised to actually steal the funds from your business rather than directly targeting your company itself. We've also seen the use of spoof domains. So where an individual isn't able to compromise your account initially, they may register domain names that look very, very similar to your business or to the victim organization and use that as the initial method to try and gain entry or to actually create a victim and spoof the relationship between the criminal and the actual victim themselves. We also mentioned talking about remote access tools. Not only is there started the use of actual RAP tools out there, there's also the use of highly obfuscated techniques to try and hinder and hide the actual malware being used, such as the use of obfuscation via packed Delphi executables, trying to bypass your traditional AV solutions from actually detecting these remote access tools out there. So let's understand how we can actually prevent business email compromise happening within your organization. Quite simply, in the first stage is if you're using a cloud email provider, enable two-factor authentication. It's a very, very simple step that allows you to secure your organization very, very quickly and very, very effectively. Simply, even if the organized criminal gang has access to your credentials, they will still need to do that second factor authentication, which should be connected to your employee or individual. Now again, in some circumstances, 2FA is still able to be bypassed depending on the type of technology you're using. But again, it adds an extra security layer to defend those services from these individuals and criminal organizations. Threat intelligence can also play a key role. When it takes the use of remote access tools or keyloggers, these have to still go back to command and control infrastructure to collect the data that they've been taking as reconnaissance from your networks. Threat intelligence allows us to understand where those locations are and which criminal organizations are using them. and provide us an early warning system if these types of tools are trying to be launched in our environment, but also understand who may be using those tools and how they may be using them against your organization. We spoke about some basic obfuscation. Now, it's very, very easy to try and hide and obfuscate a RAP tool. It's very, very simple, and any organization, criminal organization, no matter their maturity, have these types of tools available to them in the open and in the public. By obfuscating, it allows those criminal organizations to simply bypass traditional AV functionalities and AV technologies. So think about looking into next generation AV tools that allow the analysis of unknown files, even if they have been packed or attempt to obfuscate. And the NGAV technologies out there have the ability to identify files which they may have never seen before and provide you protection against the malware side of business email compromise. We talked a bit about solutions and technologies, but with business email compromise, simply as having physical processes put in place. Take a look at those 5 scenarios we mentioned previously. If any of those scenarios occur, very, very simply creating that physical process where an individual must gain confirmation before doing a transfer could save your organization a lot of money. In some cases, people feel embarrassed to make these requests, but making it simple and make sure your employees understand, no matter any big or small transaction, to make these physical validations will make sure that simply you won't be affected or potentially could be a target and lose a large vast of money from your organization. And going with that, employee education. These are very, very simple tactics, but the threat that I am active here is trying to create a relationship with the victim. They're using very, very comprehensive social engineering tactics, yet simple tactics, to try and gain the trust of your victim. By making sure our employees understand the scenarios, and again having those physical processes, we may allow our employees to understand the threats out there and make sure we're protected from that physical point of view as well. And lastly, incident response retainers. Now, we really hope that no one ever has these types of issues, but if this issue does occur, it's very, very important to understand the breadth of the situation. Be able to see what's actually going on, understand what the criminal organization has been doing while within your email system, and be able to get full visibility so you can quickly remediate or contain the incident. Unfortunately, when we see a lot of these attacks, they may start trying to use your email gateway to start communicating to your customers or further processing the supply chain. So when these incidents do occur, you need to understand very, very quickly and effectively the full state of the breach and the full state of the incident. Incident response retainers allow you to make sure that no matter the type of cyber threat or incident may occur, you have someone who is a professional expert group able to come and defend you and find that information out and assist you into the full remediation process. A retainer means that rather than you having to mess around with legal paperwork, you already have that organization ready to go in any case of an incident. So I'd like to say thank you very much. That's the end of today's presentation. We have quite a lot of questions, and hopefully the next stage we'll be going through some of those.
Thank you so much. That was a really fascinating presentation, and as you correctly say, we do have a lot of questions. That's perfect. We've got plenty of time to get through those, so let's get to it. Can a company not using Office 365 or Google be affected by this?
Yeah, certainly. So typically we see the criminal organizations focusing on individuals who use kind of cloud providers. But the reality is, if they are able to gain access to your email exchange boxes externally, you could potentially still fall foul of a victim.
And can you perform incident response on a cloud provider? Is that even possible?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, and actually one of our links we have in the Bright Talk system today is a link to a blog that we've recently posted from our services team. So even though you're using a third-party cloud service, there are still ways of gaining forensic artifacts and investigating a third-party cloud solution thoroughly to understand what the threat actor has been doing. Actually, as part of that blog post, we've provided a Python script, so you can actually start gathering some of those tools if you want to try and do some incident response internally. And again, would highly recommend to have a read of that blog post.
I'm definitely going to be checking that one out. I think it's, where would the responsibility lie with that? So for example, if I was using a third-party cloud provider, would you contact them directly to do the investigation, or how would it work?
The reality is there's tools out there and there's capabilities out there that organizations that have the capabilities can do the investigation. So you don't have to rely on the actual cloud provider themselves. It's still quite a niche process, so you'll have to make sure you can find an organization that is able to do that successfully.
Brilliant, thank you. You mentioned Nigerian gangs who use BEC. Are there more than one gang using this technique?
Yes, we mentioned some numbers previously, and there's many different criminal organizations operating in Nigeria as well as other countries. And again, we mentioned Black Axe as one, but the reality is there's a number of subsidiaries and other criminal organizations using the exact techniques. It's a very, very easy money-making scheme, and again, through some of the statistics we showed previously, you can see there's high value in these types of techniques.
Thank you. And are similar tactics used by other criminal organizations in different companies?
So the reality is we also see an other side of e-crime, likes of ransomware and so forth. And typically when we start looking into other kind of companies, countries, etc., they usually opt more for malware types of techniques, whereas when we look into more Nigeria, it's kind of more focused around business email compromise. But saying that, it is still a technique that is used in other e-crime focused countries, but maybe not as much.
Brilliant. Now, this is quite a topical question in light of GDPR. Would you consider BEC a data breach under the GDPR?
The reality is it depends on the scope of the incident. It's a very, very good question, and I think it's very, very important if you feel yourself have an incident to get that incident response retainer in place straight away and those processes in place. To really be able to sufficiently answer that question, you need to understand what the scope of the incident actually is. And so, as with GDPR, you should have an IR retainer in place, and you'd want to start going through those processes if you feel something suspicious or illegal has occurred.
Brilliant, thank you. Now this is a very interesting question, so it's quite long, just bear with me. How often is the public information used to engineer the attack? LinkedIn, Twitter, website, news articles, etc. Can that be used to construct a plan of attack or plot the organizational structure of the target?
So the reality is open source information is used widely against many different threat actors. We're not just talking about business email compromise, but any kind of cyber threat who wants to target a business or organization individually is going to use the information that's openly available to them. If you can quickly start understanding who works in your financial department and you want to target the finance department, it makes your life a lot easier. Especially when you start looking at business email compromise, the core aim is to find your victim and target your victim. And if you can find your victim quicker, that makes that your organization a bigger target. So the reality of the answer is it's used frequently, not just even by these types of campaigns. And we must, as organizations, we must be wary of the information our employees post on those public sources because, again, someone may be using it against you.
It's a good point, definitely, to be aware of what we're posting. Now, there are a couple of questions coming in about Office 365. So, do you have any advice? Oh, hang on a minute. I think the questions are coming in so fast, they keep disappearing. Where were we? Do you have any advice on Microsoft Office 365 MFA service? It seems weak as they provide static passwords for apps which could be compromised on the endpoint.
I need a bit more further information on that question to answer thoroughly, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. So the questions, for anyone who is asking a question, whatever we can't get to, they will be passed back to CrowdStrike, who can reach out. You mentioned employee education as one of the preventative measures. However, experience learns us that the attack vectors are changing regularly. Is there some kind of fora or knowledge base where such attack scenarios are shared? I know that banks tend to exchange such information, but it's not widespread.
Yeah, unfortunately, the threat landscape today is ever changing. You know, today with today's seminar, we're only having a conversation against business email compromise. Business email compromise is part of one of many different attack vectors that many different criminal organizations and cyber criminals use to target organizations. The reality is there isn't a sole one independent place to look for this information, although saying that there are a number of organizations doing good work in trying to build frameworks. One of the frameworks that I would definitely advise anyone to look into, and it's not for the soul of business email compromise, but it kind of focuses on the full attack landscape, is the MITRE attack framework, which is developed and managed by MITRE. MITRE is basically a public organization who actually fund this through their own means. And again, it's a great framework to look into if you're trying to understand the kind of breadth of the actual attack surface is today from a threat landscape point of view. That's happy to post that as a link in the system.
Thank you very much. Now, here's a question. It looks like speaking from experience. The question is, we were compromised in the winter. We now have 2FA in place. Do you think this makes us safe now?
It definitely actually helps towards protecting you. The reality is, again, we spoke about a number of means of actually gaining access to the system. And it also depends on the type of 2FA you're using. If it's two-factor authentication by SMS, and we've seen attackers realize these processes are in place and actually reach out directly to the actual individuals and provide further social engineering tactics on top. Again, technology is not the only place, and 2FA is not the only solution that can help you. And also, must always remember education needs to be there as well to make sure our employees understand how to use those tools properly.
Brilliant, thank you. What basic controls can we implement immediately to stop cloud email service attacks?
Again, I think literally one of the easiest mechanisms to really defend yourselves is two-factor authentication, which does actually add a very, very good layer. And again, kind of following the recommendations we provided at the end of the slide, really will help an organization to mitigate these types of attacks.
Thank you. Now, I don't know if you're able to answer this, Becky, but there are a couple of questions around the statistics. So I'll just pop those out there and we'll see. You mentioned that there are 5 million Nigerian youths involved in BEC. Where did this statistic come from?
I can provide the link and resources, but these are all open information from open source locations. So everything we've kind of talked about today is available to everyone in the open media, and these are all open statistics.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Next question. What are some of the common evasion techniques used during these attacks once an attacker is inside an environment or has access to a mailbox?
The reality is that the evasion tactics aren't kind of similar to we see with more sophisticated attacks. The evasion techniques are typically just trying to monitor the mailboxes for certain keywords to make sure no one has actually realized they're actually in the system. Typically these attacks are going to try and hit as quickly as possible within the organization and then carry on and move on elsewhere. So there isn't really too many evasion techniques used in reality.
Okay, thank you. Is there some organized way of dealing with suspected mule accounts, meaning exchange of mule accounts between banks to block suspicious transfers pending further examination?
Typically, those types of things will fall under the bank's internal policies for detecting fraud. In a lot of cases, these could be accounts that have been operating for some time. They'll use individuals from the actual cybercrime organization to go to countries like China and to Hong Kong, where legislation is a little bit weaker, and the ability to create these bank accounts, and also the communication between European banks may be a lot longer to communicate back to regarding fraud. So even in some cases, these aren't accounts that are brand new. These are accounts that have been utilized and have been open for quite some time that then get used as part of the process. Or again, they could be legitimate accounts as part of further scam or individual who has been scammed to use their account as part of the transfer process.
Great, thank you. So essentially, it can actually just come down to the individual organization, is that correct?
That's very, very correct. The reality is a lot of banks today are doing a very, very good job to try and actually detect these types of fraud initially. But again, it all comes down to how quickly you can verify it and validate it. So for example, you may believe the transfer is completely correct. Your bank blocks it, contacts you, you feel it's correct, and because you haven't validated the actual information with the other third party, it's usually too late until you can resolve it. So a lot of the cases, the banks have the process in place to catch these types of activities, but the social engineering part of it is so successful that the individual still feels that what they're doing is 100% correct, and then when maybe usually a few hours or days later they realize it isn't, it's too late to actually pull back that money.
Thank you for that. Now, we've obviously focused on, all of us know mostly about these email attacks. This is an interesting question. How is the telephone/follow-up attack growing or reducing in your experience? Is there a greater emphasis on email-only attacks, or are the more sophisticated two-handed attacks on the rise?
The reality is, I think they come hand in hand together. The telephone process still plays a key role. And again, it's not really an independent attack. It's just part of the overall social engineering process the criminal organization will try and do with the victim. And it really depends on the type of attack that's being seen. But yes, as these types of attacks rise, we'll see those attacks carry on because it's part of that social engineering process the criminal organization will do to try and target and try and legitimize the process with the actual victim.
And just following on from that, and this is more of a kind of personal interest question, is there research done around the potential victims? Obviously, there'll be a certain generation who are more au fait with emails than others, so will they kind of say, well, if it's a pensioner, for example, then it's going to be more likely to be a telephone attack, or does it really just depend?
I haven't really got any statistics to kind of back this, but what we've seen is it's actually a variety. We mostly work with large organizations, but on a regular basis, you're still seeing small companies and also individuals being targeted as well. So the reality is, I think the landscape from a victim's point of view, it could be anything and anyone.
Thank you.
And the tactics kind of employed will be whatever's needed to be able to make the operation successful.
Okay, it's very interesting. So taking it back to the workplace, there's a question here around penetration tests. How can penetration tests for this kind of attack be carried out without blaming your own employees in case they fail, and also without breaking working laws?
Penetration testing can be used in many different ways. I think the most importantly is to, again, from personal aspects, to remember that these kind of processes is to kind of identify weaknesses in the system. and not use this as a blame game, but as a mechanism to put in the right process in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. The point of penetration testing is to actually realize what this score is, what's the output, and try and fix those holes rather than point fingers to make sure you are secure. Again, it really depends on the type of testing you're about to do regarding legislations. But again, there's a number of services out there ranging from these types of attacks to physical attacks and social engineering processes, which allows you to identify those holes in your organization. I think most importantly is to kind of have that open, not to kind of pull fingers and play the blame game. We need to make sure we use this as a process that we can fix our networks and our physical security as strongly as possible.
Absolutely. Is there any observation regarding the service or protocol the scammers use to log into the compromised mailbox? For example, Exchange or any other webmail service?
They typically would just use the exact same service that you have access to. So, for example, through HTTPS, or again, usually directly log in through their browser and their internet connection. In some cases, we see using proxies to try and obfuscate data, but they'll just be literally logging in the same way that you log into your mailbox today.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, can CrowdStrike endpoint security help protect against email scams?
Yeah, so CrowdStrike has the ability to provide protection from a number of layers. One of the things that we do is overall end protection and EDR. So not only are we able to provide the mitigation, prevention of malware use by these types of scams, but also provides you the forensic data to be able to quickly understand the scope of the incident as well.
Great, thank you. And just as I thought we were getting to the end of the questions, there are still some more coming in. What preventive or compensating controls, other than training, penetration testing, etc., can be implemented to mitigate the risk?
Okay, I think we spoke about this a few times already. One of the easiest mechanisms that's available to anyone today is two-factor authentication really helps with this. And again, most importantly, having kind of like an instant response retainer in place just in case.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm looking through, I think most of these now have already been addressed. So what we will do is we'll bring the Q&A to a close. If there is anybody, again, we will pass the information back to CrowdStrike. So if there is anyone who hasn't had their question answered, then we will be able to get those done for you. Thank you so much, Zeki. That was really interesting, and certainly from kind of, I guess, my own non-technical layman's point of view, this is something which I know people who've been affected by this. So it's definitely good to get a further understanding. For those of you who have been with us for 45 minutes, as I mentioned, one CPE for this session will be uploaded to your member accounts, typically within 5 to 7 business days. There were a couple of admin questions earlier on, so if you want to just drop us an email, it's membersupport@isc2.org regarding the housekeeping, and we can certainly help you with those. The next upcoming webinar is actually this Thursday, 28th of June, and then we have the next one on the 9th of July, which is your guide to membership. So for those of you who may be new members, or even those of you who are long-standing members, and would just like a little bit more about your membership, please do join us for that session. If you want to deliver a webinar, get your company involved, or have any content-related questions, please email Patricia. Her details are there. She manages our webinar channel. And please leave your feedback and comments below. Thank you very much for attending. And for those of you who may be in the UK, I hope you enjoy a lovely sunny afternoon.